Okay, hi everyone. All right, so I'm going to get started. I know we might still be having some people show up, but I'm going to start with the introductions. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Hello and welcome everyone. Please note that live transcriptions are turned on for this event. So please feel free to turn them on and off as you would like. The option is listed on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom window with the button that says closed captioning. And also please note that tonight's event is being recorded. I'm going to first read a land and labor acknowledgement specific to Illinois State University, but since this is an open event, I encourage us all to explore this for the areas you may be joining us virtually from tonight. Okay, so for our labor acknowledgement, Illinois State University was built on the land of multiple Native nations. These lands were and are the traditional birthright of Indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed and have faced centuries of struggle for survival and identity in the wake of dispossession and displacement. We'd like to acknowledge that our campus sits on the lands that were once home to the Illini, Peoria, and the Mi'kmaq, and later, due to colonial encroachment and displacement, to the Fox, Potawatomi, Sauk, Shawnee, Winnebago, Iowa, Muskogean, Piankashaw, Wee, and Kickapoo nations. As these struggles are ongoing, it's critical to acknowledge and pay respect to the land back movement for sovereignty being led by Indigenous peoples today. We also express honor to those Indigenous peoples who may have been excluded in this acknowledgement due to erasure and historical inaccuracy. And our labor acknowledgement. We must acknowledge that this country would not exist if it was not for the free and enslaved labor of Black people due to violence and white supremacy. We wish to pay respect to the Black Lives Matter movement in recognition of the ongoing violence against Black people in the United States today. And we must work to honor the legacy of the African diaspora, Black life, knowledge, and skills. And so I want to thank you all for your attention to these acknowledgements. One of the most important aspects of these acknowledgements is to recognize that they are simply that, an acknowledgement. They're only the first step towards meaningful change. We must work and commit ourselves to educating, learning, and unlearning harmful power dynamics at systems of power, and therefore we perpetuate often unknowingly. There are many incredible movements being led today, and we must listen to those leading them and work alongside and in solidarity with them. As members of a public settler colonial institution, we acknowledge our responsibility not only to understand these histories, but also to actively confront the ways in which colonial and white supremacist policies and thinking continue in our personal and professional lives. Okay, and so before I introduce tonight's program, I also just really quickly want to note that I'm going to be sharing a link in the chat in a little bit with a resource list for tonight's event. This list will have links and resources about our speaker Cecil, including information about his monograph that we have at Milner Library on campus and work in the permanent collection at university galleries. It also includes resources relating to the land and labor acknowledgements I just read. And by no means is this a comprehensive guide, but rather just kind of a jumping off point for more engagement. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions or suggestions for future resource lists for the events. And so without further ado, I want to welcome everyone to the event tonight on the matter of subject, What We Photograph Matters with Cecil McDonald Jr. This is the second event in the 2021-22 speaker series, Experiencing Images, How the Visual Shapes Our World. This lecture series features distinguished speakers from a variety of backgrounds to explore individual and collective engagement with photography and images. Through decoding this visual landscape, we can become more conscious of how we use images to construct identity and meaning. My name is Holly Filsinger. I'm a graduate student in the visual culture program here at ISU and the curator for this series. I want to thank the Won-Suk Kim School of Art for hosting, the Office of Research and Graduate Studies for the opportunity to create this speaker series, and well as our many co-sponsors for the series, whose name you can see here on the screen. Without all of these groups, none of this would be possible, so thank you all. And without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome Cecil McDonald Jr. virtually to ISU tonight. Cecil McDonald Jr. uses photography, video, and text to explore the intersections of masculinity, familial relations, and the artistic and intellectual pursuits of Black culture. McDonald studied fashion, house music, and dance club culture before receiving an MFA in photography at Columbia College, Chicago, where he currently serves as an adjunct professor. His work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally, with works in the collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art, Chicago Bank of America LaSalle Collection, and the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. He was awarded the Joyce Foundation Midwest Voices and Vision Award, the Arcadia Award, the Swiss Benevolent Society Lucerne Switzerland Residency, and the 3 Arts Teaching Artist Award. In the Company of Black, his first comprehensive monograph was published by Candor Arts and was shortlisted for the first photographic book of the year by the Aperture Foundation and Paris Photo. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Cecil and thank him and all of you so much for being here tonight.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, okay, I'm looking at my lighting here. It looks good. All right, I can start now. It's good to see everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So just to give you a sense of how this will roll out, I'll speak just from my mind and just casually just talking to you, but also prepared some remarks that I would like to share as well. I learned over the years that sometimes you can start to ramble, and when the talk is over, you haven't said the things that you really wanted to share with the audience. They don't know this, but it peeves me at the end. Like, man, I didn't tell them that. So even though it's written right next to me, so I like to go back and forth between the written text and the, so how do you all admit people? See, now I'm going into teacher mode here, admitting students into the class. I got it already, that's okay. So let's just get started. So there are a couple of bodies of work I want to share. The final body would be my own work, but there are two other bodies of work that I think really speak to the spirit of this conversation, to what I gathered what the invitation was, this idea of photographs, how they function in society, how photographs move beyond what our intent and what we thought they were going to be, right? There's intent, and then there is the effect of that intent. So it was not my work. It's two artists that you all should be familiar with. I'm assuming most of the people on the call are photographers, image makers, people who are either concerned with the making and distribution of photographs. I think audience is important. So I'm just taking that into account. So my conversation lends toward photographers. The rest of you all just kind of catch up. And as always, put your comments in the chat. We don't have to wait, so to speak, because sometimes questions come to you. You want to ask them right away. So just type them down. And then also observations are good too. You know, sometimes we get focused on like really big, important questions, and it can just be something as simple as, I noticed X, Y, Z, and you want to share that with the group as well. Okay. I'm gonna share here. All right, so you all should see an image on the screen of two people in a car. Is that what we see? Get a thumbs up. Thank you so much. All right. Here, let's do this. All right. So I'm a photographer by training, visual artist by spirit. And while I'm not, what I am not is a sociologist, I'm not a historian, I'm not a philosopher, though I do seek to make images that will be in conversations with those practitioners, those disciplines. I'm hoping that my photographs will attract and entice people who are interested in and are working in those fields, because I think that's what photographs ultimately at their best do. They kind of speak to those different disciplines. I embrace the role of the intellectual in that how that role relates to the study and the thinking and the practice of photographs, or I should say picture making. Further, I am an artist of color. I identify as a Black man. So by extension, my work is often burdened with political representation, either a representation that I give it, but oftentimes more likely is representation that other people give it. I often view subject matter through the lens of race and identity. This does not deter or depress me. It is a blessing and a burden being an artist of color. The photograph has been the space where I pursue meaning making. I espouse the theory by Stuart Hall, his idea of the reception theory, in that he says, that media text, right, photographs, films, commercials are encoded and decoded. That the producer, photographers, artists, makers, we encode messages and values into that media, which are then decoded by an audience. So simply by the exchange, meaning is made. Oftentimes students think that when we ask what the photograph means, we're asking, what did you mean by making that photograph? That's just one part of it. Something happens when it's shared, shown, exchanged with an audience. That meaning can be complicated, further expanded, and then hopefully some discussion comes about from that meaning making, right? But meaning making is often a transaction. It's often a collaboration. So I make photographs in that vein. So the images I'm sharing with you right now are from, I think, what most people know me from, and what my work or my reputation, as it is, or as it were, is in the field, and it's mainly from this body of work. And this is mainly just to acquaint you, right? But the work I'm showing later is work that I've never shown or talked about in a open forum or lectured about. So I'm interested to see what the response is to that work. So let me just get right to it. So there's this artist by the name of Terrence Simon, and her project, The Innocents, is a project that really gathered my attention when I first encountered it. I think it comes out in 2002. And for the most part, these are photographs that she started as an assignment for the New York Times. The project really resonated with her, and then she set about a longer project where she photographed men who were mostly Black men, but some white men as well, men who were wrongfully accused, served time in jail, or most of the time were on death row, and then were later exonerated and released. And I'll just read something in just like a little statement about the work. So in this work, individuals who served time in prison for violent crimes they did not commit. This project explores photography's role in criminal investigation, right? The primary cause of wrongful conviction, and in most instances, mistaken identification, right? And I think that's really interesting, right? So the use of photographs and lineups, this procedure relies on the assumption of precise visual memory, which we know is what photography is mainly all about, right? But through exposure to composite sketches, mugshots, Polaroids, and lineups, eyewitness memory can change, right? And so in the history of these cases, photography offered the criminal justice a tool that transformed innocent citizens into criminals. Photographs assisted officers in obtaining witness identification and aided prosecutors in securing convictions, right? So this is really wonderful kind of circular meta thing where photography, in this case, is being used as an investigation tool to look at photographic practice, right? And I like that she's taken the tool of photography, or the tool of the camera, and pointing at the problem, right? And then this thing where the camera and the photograph looks back at us. And I just really think that's a really interesting situation to find yourself in, particularly as a photographer, right? So in one case, you could say that as a photographer, you are somehow implicated in the cause of what has happened to these men. She starts out photographing these men at sites that they had particular significance to their illegitimate convictions, right? The scenes of misidentification, the scene of the arrest, the scene of the crime, or the scene of the alibi, right? All these locations hold contradictory meanings for the subject. The scenes of the arrest marks the starting point of a reality based in fiction, right? So I really So when I'm sharing a body of work like this with my class, on the one hand, it's really there to talk about photographs. Um, so I'm very interested in how the picture is made, what kinds of conversations were happening in regards to staging of the photograph, right? We talk about the color, we talk about lighting. All these things are important when we talk and discuss about what a photograph does, how they're made, right? Oftentimes the meaning making is left to another class, another day. And sometimes that doesn't sit well with me, right? Because I really want to talk about what's happening in the image, right? So in the exhibition, the pictures are 48 by 60, so they're very large. They come in editions of 5. So often they're shown in museums, gallery settings, not in newspaper journals, in the press per se. They are shown and considered and thought of as art objects, right? Each image has its own caption. In this case, Frederick Day alibi location is the American Legion Post 310, San Diego, California, where 13 witnesses placed Day at the time of the crime, right? He served 10 years of a life sentence for kidnapping, rape, and vehicle theft, 2002. So I like to pick apart and think about how the picture came into being, right? Because she is charged with a different location. So you see in a picture like this, we go from the outside, from the inside to the outside, another part of the country. So sadly, there are so many cases that she ends up going all around the country, in different parts of the regions, south, north, and everyone's story is so different, but yet they all end up in the same place. And I just really love this way of, and I hesitate to use words like love, like, beautiful in a body of work like this, but as a pure photograph, they resonate with me on those levels, right? This is in my hometown, Chicago. Ronald Jones, scene of the arrest, Southside Chicago, Illinois, served 8 years of a death sentence for rape and murder, 2002. Right? I actually even know where this is at, this store, right, on Stony Island Avenue in Chicago. So again, we don't often talk about what's happening with the subject, right? Their state of mind. What might it mean to be re-traumatized, going back to these spaces where you were accused, where you were caught, where you had your alibi, or where the scene of the crime supposedly happened? Like, what's happening with the subject matter? What's happening with the person in the picture? How do we deal with that? William Gregory Wick, William Gregory at Wick's Parlor, Louisville, Kentucky, with fiance Vicky Kidwell, whom he dated prior to conviction, right? And this is one of the rare captions where what happened to the person's life is also indicated by the person who's in the picture with them. Your loved ones miss you, your family, you miss your family, you miss large parts of your life. So in this way, it's like a double portrait, right? And I wonder, did Taryn ask to bring someone with you? Like, what are the kinds of conversations that are happening for a picture like this to happen, right? He looks like an uncle of mine, so he looks like he could be a McDonald. So things like that resonate with me. I just really love it as a photograph to take a look at and kind of take in. It's just beautifully lit, has all the things in it that we would want our students to kind of make, or like we point to this as a really beautiful photograph. The problem I have with the work is that oftentimes I don't want Black people to always be thought of as a problem to be solved, right? Here, the Black men need help. So she goes about and makes this photograph. I'm sure it gets funded. But it's a funny feeling to be in a museum setting where people are standing around drinking wine And I'm thinking about the person in the picture going, how does this picture really help them, right? And maybe that's not the point, right, to be helped. But I am weary of Black people being in photographs, i.e. they need our help, i.e. They are helpless. Here's yet another instance where Black people are a problem in this country. Though they didn't create these problems, we seem to be always depicted as in need or wanting help or needing help. And so I asked myself, well, what does a photograph like this do for the people in the photograph? Yes, I get, and then you could say, well, it tells their story, right? It brings attention to what's happening in the world, right? And I know intellectually all those things are important and they must be part of the conversation. But at the same time, it does nothing for me emotionally where I can feel proud to see this picture, right? And not that I need to be proud of every picture I see, but these pictures in very particular do something where clearly men have been wronged, and the photograph is just in my mind, proof of this wrongness. And maybe that's what Tara is doing, but at the same time, I think it's like this really bad feedback, this really horrible loop you find yourself in, where you're always being depicted as one way. And how do you get out of that, right? Ronald Williams, baseball field, Norman, Oklahoma. Williams had been drafted by the Oakland Athletics before being sentenced to death, served 11 years of a death sentence for first-degree murder, right? And so, like I said, these aren't only happening to Black men, right? And again, intellectually, I know this, but I enjoy seeing that. And then you wonder, is somewhere doing a project that you said we have to include other individuals so that the project doesn't seem or be slighted only for Black men, right? So there's always these kind of political behind the scenes that are happening because you participate in projects yourself. And there's always conversations about who is in the picture, who's represented in the photograph, right? So I think that's a good project to introduce students to, for many reasons that I mentioned, but we know photographs do this wonderful thing where our intent and what we think they should get from them is one thing, but of course they'll find many other things that you hadn't even thought about that may come from viewing, thinking about, writing about, and taking in these photographs. What happens when we photograph? What happens to the place and people we point our cameras at? The camera and the resulting photographs are never neutral, never static. What it records, what it sees must be critically evaluated first and foremost by the makers and certainly by a critically engaged public. And I like thinking that as a photographer, you are both those people at the same time, right? We have the luxury, but also the burden of being both. We have to understand what the photographs will do on some level, right? And yet we are in charge of making them, creating them, putting them into this distribution, publishing them. That's our charge, right? And we're also really responsible for what they do on the other end. A body of work that really does this for me that I think is really important, and a body of work that I really didn't even know exists to say, I think I discovered this work maybe 4 years ago. It's Ansel Adams's Japanese-American internment photographs at Manzana Relocation Center in California. Let's just take a look at some of these. There's Ansel, who we all know and love. Ansel gave us the zone system. He gave us those beautiful photographs of the West. I would say he's our first rock star in photography. He sits on the board of MoMA's photography department. He's friends with Beaumont Newhall, who's MoMA's first curator. So clearly he's someone who espoused that photography was an art form. He practices as such. So by the time these pictures are made in 1943, he's really famous. He's had an exhibition at MoMA by then. I think it's his first person show, solo show. And he gets a commission from the War Department to come to this camp to make these photographs. So I'll just pick up here. Adams's work here at Manzanar is a departure from his signature style landscape photographs. Although a majority of the more than 200 photographs are portraits, the image here also includes views of daily life, agricultural scenes, sports, and leisure activities. When offering the collection to the library in 1965, the library being the Library of Congress, you can go to the Library of Congress, order prints, see the entire collection, see how they, and I encourage students to go to these sites because then you can see photographs in context, because right now I've stripped the context and just showing you the image, but they have captions on the site. So you have captions and you have what the curators and the people who are responsible for the site think about the photographs, right? Which also gives us a really interesting layer. And he says here in a quote, the purpose of my work was to show how these people, suffering under a great injustice and loss of property, business, and professions, had overcome the sense of defeat and despair by building for themselves a vital community in an arid but magnificent environment. All in all, I think this Manzanar collection is an important historical document, and I trust it can be put to good use, right? I love that. And this is the good use I think he's thinking of at some point, that he understood that the photographs would be studied, critically engaged, right? But I wonder, as a photographer here and now, you go to a place where people are interned, like how do I make honest pictures on a space like that? So let's just take a look at some of the things the photographs were shown shortly thereafter in a book. And I did some work around like researching how they were perceived and how they were talked about. And it's this really interesting things that the oppressor does to the oppressed, is very interested in depicting the people they are oppressing as happy, as content, as this is not as bad as you might think it is, right? Here are the photographs, because right, what photographs are truths. Photographs don't lie. Photographs give us a real and concrete context. Photographs by nature are objective, right? This is what they would want us to think, because we know photographs are very subjective. So Adams is, of course, going to create beautiful photographs, wonderful tonal scales. We could talk all day about what these photographs are doing in a very technical sense, which for me make the photographs more palatable to ingest and take in, because they are so beautiful, right? The mountains are in the back. How bad could this place be that we've sent our American citizens to? I mean, really, look at this. How bad could it be? All right. We do know that Ansel had a person that was employed by his family, and he was upset because this person, who happened to be of Japanese descent, worked for his family for years, and then one day the United States government just came and took him away. So this was something that was personal for Ansel as well, right? That our employee, and in what capacity he doesn't say, was just taken out into the middle of the night and never seen from again. So he goes there, I think, with the right intention. He goes there with a pure heart. But the photographs end up, to me, being like fairy tales, right? And we mistake, because it says, well, the Japanese were able to grow their own crops, right? They had school, they had doctors, they had nurses. Well, of course, because everyone that was in the United States that you took, you put them all into the same space, right? And there are many photographs like this that depict people who are happy on some level. Like, that's the word that keeps coming back to me, right? Or content is probably a better word, right? Everyone's content. And we do know, since the camera is a political tool, but the camera is also a symbol and an instrument of power, right? And so when you point it at someone or something who does not share the same power structure with you, I think that people will naturally, if they feel powerless, will turn themselves over to you, will open themselves up to you. We've already been corralled and set into the space, right? And here's this man who clearly is an important man that's coming to make our photographs, right? I say, be careful in the ways in which you seek to make meaning. Are we trophy hunting, right? Photographs as a trophy of a space, a trophy of a place that's not your place. Why are you there, right? I often ask my students that, why are you in this place making photographs, right? In this case, photographic meaning depends largely on context. Meaning is always directed by layout, captions, set, and site and mode of presentation. Photographs in a book read very differently than photographs in a wall in a gallery. Photographs in a book seem to be kind of permanent. They seem to have a certain importance to them, right? We probably should have that book. And if it's in the book, it's probably real, right? And there are these really interesting pictures like this, where this person is a Christian on some level, not a Buddhist, right? But a Christian. And I love that we don't sense that, or I know this, that oftentimes oppressed people will give the oppressor things that they think they want them to see, right? It makes it easier for us to get along. This is what you expect, so here it is, right? So I see this picture as being rife with deceit on some level, right? But also, it's ironic is that the person in the picture is clearly a United States Armed Service veteran of some sort, and they're there to prove to you that we shouldn't be here because we are one of you, right? Here's a photograph as proof of that. Of course, the answer sees that and makes the still life of that picture. And so there are many photographs like this where they're kind of frontal, the shoulder, everything's faces the camera. And in this case, the subject holds his cabbage as prizes, right? Look what we grow, look what we can do. We're happy here. We are content here. And it just be a little while before this is over and you'll let us come back to helping you out again, letting us be part of society, right? And so on some level, the photographs read is very sad to me, right? And it made me rethink Ansel's place, not in a sense that he should not have made these photographs. I'm glad he made them, right? Because I think our students, and it happens to me, and you'll see this in my next body work that I'll show you, our students will encounter these type of scenarios. What will be your role in the way this photograph is read? And you could argue that you could start by not making the picture, right? But we know artists have egos. In this case, he was indignant because of what happened to someone that was in the employ of his family. I'm Ansel Adams. I'm well regarded and well known. I should make these photographs, right? I want to see what's happening in that space. We know that artists are oftentimes adventure seekers. We want to see the things that no one else sees. We want to go places that no one else has been. So I understand the call to make photographs like this, all right? Does he know that the United States government is using him? Is the United States using him, right? I say it rhetorically, I don't know, but you would have to wonder that, right? Are you in danger of being used for your talent, right? Because it's not something that we could do, but we know that you'll make this thing that we know we should not be doing easier for the public to accept. One, because they're beautiful. Two, because you have a reputation, right? So I'm always asking my students to understand the role that you play, right? When you decide you're going to commit to a certain group of photographs, a certain group of people, a place, a space, like what will your role be? Because as we can see here, I like to think the photographs we make and publish today will function and read radically different in the coming decades, right? And when we do further reading, we know that these camps had plenty of uprisings, plenty of people who resist. There were people there making photographs, right? We know Dorothea Lange came and made photographs, right? But for some reason, her photographs were not considered I really think that her pictures were too messy on the edges, right? Where a picture like this is very clean. It's a beautiful lady, right? She's a nurse. She's there to help us. She's a very calming effect, right? She's there for us, right? And so I feel like the image in this case, why they would pick Ansel's work, one, because he's a man, right? Dorothea's work, and then there's a Japanese photographer whose name, forgive me, escapes me now, who's also working there at the same time, right? So to me, those are the type of images that could have stood for this grouping, stood for this time, but of course, they're not clean enough. They don't pass the smell test, right? And so when I know that students are going into places where I know you don't live, I know you're not from, I often say this, are you helping someone there learn how to make photographs so they can tell their own stories? If you must make that photograph, you feel like you invested in that space, who's there that's interested in learning how to do what you do, right? Especially if it's a long-term project. Now, if you're a journalist, you're going there for a day or two, that might not happen. But if you're doing a long documentary series, and you know this is not your space, right? Again, does not mean that you can't go there, but what do you do besides take from that space? And when you make no mistake, when you're making photographs, you are taking on some level, extracting on some level. And then who are the people that you could bring along? Who are the people that you could say, hey, you know, I could teach you how to make photographs too. You can learn how to tell your stories as well. Sorry. And then the irony of this picture, free press. It's like, really? Really? All right? And it's a fantastic photograph. It says it all to me. And I have to understand and think that Ansel understands that the picture he's making is doing this ironic thing. There's nothing free about this space, right? You're free to tell your own stories within the space, right? We even give you the wherewithal to make it, but it would never go outside of this space, right? Or did it? Because now we're looking at it, right? And you wonder about the people in the photographs, like how many people saw these photographs of themselves, right? How many people know that these pictures even exist, right? How many people, generations removed, would have seen these pictures and saw their ancestors in them? And then what kinds of effect will that photograph have on them, right? Because we assume that it's all about the person in the photograph, but again, photographs live for long times, right? They have like this kind of, once it makes it into our archive, it's there forever, right? So I always wonder, like, did their sons and daughters, 2, 3 generations later ever see in these photographs? And I would probably say yes. It'd be good to hear those stories, right? And what did these photographs do to them, seeing them? What did they understand by viewing the photographs? So occasionally, you'll be asked to do the very thing that you rail against other people for doing, right? And then you're charged with this thing. Will you do this, right? So many of you know, if you know my work, I'm very much about the celebration of Black culture. I'm very much interested in how Black culture is expansive, how Black culture does these wonderful things in the society, right? And then you get a call out the blue that says, this is Barbara from the Sisterhood, which by itself goes, the Sisterhood. Okay, what is that about? That's kind of interesting, right? And she said that we are a collective of Chicago mothers, all women of colors, each of whom have lost a child to gun violence, including gang violence and police brutality. We would like for you to come and make our portraits. I'm like, man. I said, ma'am, I don't really do that kind of work. I'm honored that you asked me to do it, but I wouldn't even know where to start. It's not the kind of work that I make. Have you seen my photographs? She said, yeah, we were just on the site all day today. All of us sitting around looking at the picture, and we just love what you do. And it's my ego, right? So I'm like, oh, okay. I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I just can't do these photographs, right? First off, I'm triggered by all kinds of things when you start talking about Black men, the police, and I don't want any parts. I don't want any parts of that, right? I was lucky. I came up in the 80s. I was not affected by gang violence, crack epidemic, AIDS epidemic. I missed all of that. And by missing it, I mean, it didn't affect me directly. Now, I had friends and people who were part of my scene who suffered from these societal afflictions, but I was always able to navigate around those things. I was never arrested, never had any interaction with the police. So I have friends who go into prisons to do poetry and teach. I refuse to do that kind of work. I just will not go, right? One, I'm afraid, right? That's probably the biggest reason. I'm afraid. But then everyone else is doing it, so why do you need me? Why do you need another person to do this work? They called me 3 more times. And so then after a while, I said, well, who are you, Cecil McDonald, not to do this? Like, how do you get to sit out when everyone else around you are in this kind of struggle, in this kind of fight? Who are you to sit this out, right? You and your fancy book and your fancy pictures in the galleries, right? And I said, well, if I do this, I have to do it my way. I have to do the photographs that I think I want, that would best show what's happening in your life, right? And then you ask yourself, how do you make a photograph that doesn't do what's already been done in these type of photographs? So I talk about Terrence Simon's pictures, right? So we end up doing them, and let me just share them with you. So they were really, the first thing I wanted to do, because they was like, well, can I bring the picture of my son? And you have to say no. I said no, right? Which is really hard to tell a woman, who's like, I want to somehow celebrate him. I said, well, is there any way else we could do that, And eventually I released that, because then I started again. So this is my ego. This is you doing this, Cecil. You have to follow these people and let them show you the kinds of pictures that will be made, right? So just keep telling your ego to go to the side. And that's what I end up doing. And so she came with Maurice on her shirt, and that's the name of her son. He was a ball player, right? And this is the court where he played ball at. So the thing I said, can we go someplace where you have a memory of your son that makes you feel good, that makes you smile, that it brings back a happy kind of feeling and emotion? Is there a place like that exists? Can we go there? And so we end up when this is her daughter in the photograph. So then when I started going and doing the interviews in their home, I realized, oh, I have a lot in common with these women. Well, some of us are the same age. Your son is the same age as my daughter is or was. Oh, you went to the same high school as I did. There's all these things that, oh, we went to the same nightclubs. We went to the same spaces, right? We knew, some of us knew same people. So then I said, oh, you're not that removed at all, Cecil. You're like one step away from this person. And this could be your child, okay? So I would go into their homes and they would have like these shrines or altars. So that became like the focal point, like, is there a way to put that in the photograph so the photograph could still do this thing where I wanted to make a picture where they could look at it and put it up on their wall, because it's not going to appear in a paper. It is on a Northwestern's website, and I'll show that to you later, but it's not going to appear in the usual spaces that these pictures would appear, right? Because we see these pictures on the news at night, we see them in papers, but we don't really know how the people live, where they live, or what they even do after all this is said and done, right? It's the stain of you, or someone you know has been killed by the police. There's a stain to that, right? So each home provided its own kind of challenge. I came and I sat with these women. Sometimes we would sit for an hour, then make a photograph. Then I learn more about them as I'm breaking down my set. And they say, you want some coffee? You want to have a drink? Then we sit and talk even longer, right? And so by the time I was done with the project, I had a whole group of new people that I knew that were friends of mine, that I would follow, right? And I did this project right before the George Floyd incident happened. So all this, so then it's like, oh, I made these pictures for this reason, right? And clearly that was not my intent. I had to be dragged to the pictures, right? But Kerry James Marshall always says, he says this thing. Kerry James Marshall is a painter here in Chicago. He says, the thing that you think is the most corniest, problematic thing you would never touch, that's probably the thing you should run to and see if you can make something happen there. And I was thinking about, this is what happened with me on these pictures. So then it became like, how do I make this picture? I mean, how do you see Cecil McDonald in the photograph, right? But not in an ego way, but in a supportive way, in a way where when they saw the pictures, it's like, oh, this is why we had Cecil come, right? Because he would make a photograph that I would look back on. And yes, he's only here because of what happened to me, but he's doing something, he's expressing my pain, or as they like to say, how do I grieve? How do I help them grieve in a healthy way? Because I thought it was kind of interesting. I said, well, how do you get past this if you're always thinking about it, right? Usually we talk that someone dies, you get some distance after a while, they're always there in a way, but you don't join a club where everyone talks about it all the time, right? But then that's my ignorance. I didn't know this thing. I'm like, oh, well, no, you probably need ongoing, because this is very traumatic. I've never had this kind of trauma in my life, right? And so then I began to be grateful that I had not had this trauma. I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of emotional about thinking about these pictures now. Well, I'm not sorry, but I think it's interesting that I am getting emotional. I lost my thought. But I became very, and I embraced the role as their supporters, the tellers of their stories. My hand is still there because I am an artist. Why have me here if I'm not going to have my hand in it, right? But they would lead me, right? I would let them take over and kind of guide me through what our journey would end up being. And then what the pictures also taught me a lot about how life is. And I think I knew this intellectually. You know things intellectually, but sometimes you have to learn them emotionally too. Also, life is really precious because we're sitting here and she's showing me the picture of her son as a child. And but at the same time, she's wondering, Cecil, is my house okay? Does everything look good around here? So she had this very odd thing of wanting to present herself in this photograph in a very particular certain kind of way, right? And I'm thinking, well, but you just lost your child though. Why do you care about any of that, right? So it spoke to their strength of trying to balance, I'm still in the world, I'm still of the world, though someone who I love and care for deeply is no longer in the world with me. Like, how do I still present myself, right? So I just thought that was really interesting. I'm like, Donna, why do you care about that? I got to be able to know them well enough to say, well, Donna, why do you care about that? You know, you can look and be however you want to be. She's like, no, are you kidding? You know, this is my house has to look a certain way. And so it's like, oh, okay. So I don't know, these things really opened up what a photograph could mean, right? And again, I've never lectured on these pictures like this. So you all are getting, I spoke with a class earlier this morning, but this is the first time I've kind of put it into my larger body of work. I think on some level I was ashamed of it, right? And not shame in that, oh, I didn't make those, but ashamed of what they meant, right? In that yet another person from my race, from my culture has been taken away for some, you know, some reason, right? And so that shame becomes something you have to deal with, even as an image maker, as an artist in that space, you still have to deal with that in a way, right? So that's why I think that my shame was, right? And it's funny because I'm like, well, it didn't happen to you. What are you ashamed of, right? I also learned a lot about deaf culture, right? That there's a whole kind of deaf culture and the selling of deaf culture, right? In that, oh, these are people you lost, but this is how you can memorialize them. They're t-shirts, they are blankets, they are pillows, they're just so many things. I was like, wow, this is something that did not exist 20 years ago, right? And I'm old enough to know this. When someone died, you had an obituary, maybe a picture was up, and then that was it. But now there's a whole, there are faces on balloons, and there was just all these things, right? So I had that kind of lesson I learned too, with regards to, oh, this is what's happening in the world. And so now it begets like this kind of capitalist striving where you can make money off the fact that our people are dying, right? And then I learned, okay, other artists are doing this work too, because she said, well, Cecil, I really want this picture. Here's her son here on the left. She said, is there a way that we can include that in the photograph? I saw this picture, it says it's perfectly positioned. I think we could really make something happen. I just love him looking back at us, right? But I love the fact that if I hadn't told you all any of this information, now maybe with the ones where there's a cross in the photograph, but a picture like this, it could look like one of my photographs, right? Where the woman is just tying back the curtains because she's going to let light in, right? As a matter of fact, I procedurally, I made them like I would make all my photographs. What do you usually do in this space, right? How is this space used? How often are you here? What do you normally do here, right? And she would go about it. I said, oh, I think we have the photograph to make. And I said, well, where did you get the painting from? And she said, well, there was an artist and he painted all, they painted all of our sons' portraits, right? And then I would go to different houses and then to see their portrait that was made by the same artist. And I loved that. I said, oh, I'm in this kind of vein with these artists who are trying to support and give our talent in some way, right? However benign it is, to support and be part of these women's lives. I have no idea what time it is, guys. I'm just going. This is the leader. This is the one who contacted me first. This is outside in her patio. And she said an interesting thing. She said, is it okay if I smile in the picture? You know? I said, well, of course, you can do whatever it is you would like to do. I said, well, why did you ask that question? And she said, well, I don't want to be shown as a broken woman because I'm not broken, right? I just thought that was so powerful, right? Which led me to think, oh, that people are used to seeing themselves in these types of images as broken people, right? It's not the smile that necessarily does it, but for the lay person, on photographs are meant to be, you're supposed to smile in them, right? It's only artists who say, well, don't smile, right? We call it the artist stare, right? The art stare in portraiture. But a lay person says, or a civilian would say, I want to smile in my photograph. I am not a broken woman, right? I'm thriving and I'm still alive. I live. I have other children. And I want to be a beacon for the women who are still struggling with their grief. I just thought it was a powerful thing to say, right? And so we made this photograph. Here's a woman I bonded with as an artist. She's a fashion designer. She has a great record collection, so we talked about records. We really enjoyed each other's company. And again, another person, she said, now, Cecil, I don't want to be depicted as, some dead woman, And then also made me think, oh, well, these people are women. I mean, they're more sophisticated because, photographers can think that we just know about picture making, right? But they're sophisticated enough to know that I will be shown in this picture in a very particular way, and I want to have some control in that. I want to have a role in that. I want my voice to be present in the way I'm depicted, right? And then I love that they trusted me with that. So over time, my relationship became deeper. And then I would go to meetings that they would have without my camera just to hear the conversations and hear the things that we're talking about, right? There were certain women who wanted to go to this place where they lost their child. I didn't want to do that. I said, this is a dangerous neighborhood, right? So I'm always weary of going to neighborhoods that I didn't come from. It doesn't matter that I'm Black too, right? I didn't grow up, this is not my neighborhood. I didn't grow up here. I know this is a dangerous neighborhood. Who's this guy in the neighborhood that we don't know? And I told her that. I said, I'm really concerned about being in this space, But again, I heard that voice in the back of my head, well, go to it and just see what happens, see how it feels, right? And I think in some of the photographs, that thing still came through where clearly it's about death, clearly it's about loss. And I had to really wrestle with that. So then, you say, okay, well, the photographs, they leave me, right? They're going to do these things. And once Northwestern, once they have them, once the people who commissioned me have them, they can do what they want with them. And they will go on to do different things, right? And then how much control do we have of that? A photograph may be a fixed image, but its reception is much less stable. And its reception is not guaranteed. There's no universal truth or meaning, right? I do wonder, can the white gaze ever see a Black body in a still moving imagery and not be stimulated by the gaze's fixation with difference, right? We are, as a society, are fixated on who's different. What's different about you, right? And at some point you have to let that go. But I'm a more mature man, and I would imagine a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old would be wrestling with that, right? But it took me to be a middle-aged man to start to let these things go. It doesn't mean I'm not still thinking about them and still critically engaging and writing and reading and working toward a broader understanding of the things I'm making, right? But at some point you have to realize you have to make the work that you're going to make, and know going in that many things are not under your control. Your control is over once you hand over the image, right? But in the front end of that, you can say, well, I'm not going to make this type of image. I'm not going to make an image that does X, Y, and Z, right? Because presumably you've done your homework and you understand what's already out there and how those things represent the people you are interacting with. Now I'll just show you this right quick. So I think it's important to show the context in which those works live, right? So it's very different than what I showed you. This organization deals with how to give voice to from everyone from Holocaust survivors to Black women in Chicago who have lost their kids to violence. So there's a broad spectrum, right? And I don't want to get into, you know, whose trauma is worse or whose trauma is more important, because it's all trauma, right? But I think it's interesting to see how, I wanted to see how this functions on a site, because again, context is given now. And here, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it so that we understand in a more nuanced way, a more critical way what's happening, right? It talks about the woman's story. See, these are the things you're not going to get on a 10 o'clock newscast. You might get it in a newspaper. Public radio is probably the only place where you're going to get something in depth. Everything else is going to be very surface. Like, what kind of image is sensational? What kind of image will draw attention, or in our society get clicks, right? And who's going to take the time to read about these women beyond, oh, you lost your son. Oh, again, another one of them has, you know, they're very violent. So that happens to them, right? So then, you know, everyone kind of tells their story of what happened. Like this, my son Larry was a gadget person like me. So I'm not gonna read all of that, but I love, she tells the story of who this person was, and he's not just a game banger. He's not just another victim. He's not a hashtag, right? He was a person who had a life. And so everyone, so Gwendolyn was the person I showed you first. So this is her story. And so I just like, if you go through the site, you'll see these stories and open them up more and more of a critical engagement with them, right? All right, so I've been talking for about an hour now. That went by fast. So I know talks are usually 45, 50 minutes. So where are we? Does anyone have a question? Does anyone want to talk to me? Let me pull up something else.
Hey, Cecil, this is Holly. Were you trying to share your website with us, or the Sisterhood website? The screen is just still showing your PowerPoint. I wasn't sure if you were trying to.
Oh, okay, all right, hold on. Let me reshare. Thank you, Holly. So I was just rattling on. So this is the site. If you go to it, it has the photographs that I made. And again, this site, they represent, you know, groups who have experienced some type of violence, not just, you know, Black people in Chicago, but people all over the world. And then if you click on you get their story. And like I said, I think that's a much better way to think about how people are experiencing death, how they're experiencing grief, how they're experiencing violence, right? And it just kind of opens up what's happening with them. And I like that my photographs can lend kind of a visual, have a way to pull you to the site, but then once you're there, you can learn stuff about people and what's going on. Like in some cases, it's about what happened, like very specifically, this is what happened to them. In other cases, it's more about what they were known for, what their son, what made their son special, right? like this. It's not the fact that he died, it's how he died. If he had just gone in his room and didn't wake up, I would grieve over it. And you would say, okay, that's life. But who are you to think you could just come and take somebody's life, right? The man that took my son's life only got 7 years. So that means that man is back in the streets. I think that justice was not served. So then it's like very much conversational. Yeah, so again, I just wanted to show you all this in context, much like if you went to, see if I can pull it up right quick. It's not gonna be quick. So if you went to the Library of Congress site and looked at the Ansel Adams pictures, again, how the pictures sit there, clearly the government is in charge of how we understand what we are looking at, right? Because yes, they're going to be scholars, they're going to be people like me, they're going to be other photographers who go and see those pictures and might not need any of that. But for the lay person who kind of stumbles upon it, they're like, oh, I didn't even know. Well, you should know. If you know you're in the United States, you know this happened, but you don't know that this body of work exists. So I'm just trying to see if I can find that right quick. Probably not. I could take a question while I do this if someone has one. I think it's important that you all see that site. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Uh-oh, do I have to reshare again? Can you all see the Library of Congress site?
Not yet, Cecil.
Okay, stop share. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I haven't gotten there yet. I didn't think I'll be doing still Zoom by now. Thought we'd be out of this. I thought I'd be on your campus looking at all your faces. All right, can you see that now? Library of Congress?
Yep.
All right. So you see the captions, baseball game, reading paper in front office, right? Now, of course, everything that I read to you, that first paragraph, but it also talks about the war relocation program. And even it took not to 1988 is when the government formally apologized, right? A congressional apology, right? And they will authorize $20,000 payments to Japanese American descendants who suffered injustice during the World War II. But we still don't have apologies for slavery, right? I think that's interesting, right? And part of it is that so much documentation is here. And that's the importance of documenting things, right? You know, so for generations will know this, and you'll be brought on the carpet, you know, you'll be brought to bear as the witness of this, right? So that's the importance of documenting, photographing, putting your camera in places that you might not be comfortable in. That's the importance of that, right? Because I don't think this happens unless we know, and the United States government has to look at their history. And photographs are a fantastic way of making you look at history, right? Yeah, and then here you can buy prints. I think that's interesting. And also you can listen as well. They have it's a really great site to take a look at that. So I haven't been monitoring the chat. Maybe it's a question there, but observations, thoughts, things you want to share, I really like to hear them.
So, Cecil, I have a question for you, another question for you again. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the talk again. And again, thank you for coming to class this morning.
Oh,
yeah. So earlier you talked about this notion of kind of the, seeing, the problem, right? Who's the problem? And I wonder if you could just talk for a second. I guess I'm asking this through maybe through a photographer's viewpoint. but I kind of want to, so I also kind of want to know for the notions of citizenship, right? Because I think I mentioned this earlier. I think about citizenship. I think about the image, right? And some of the earlier speakers talked about that. Like my dissertation director, John Lucades, talks about, you know, how the public image creates citizenship. So I wonder, but I was really interested in this notion of, you know, the problem, right? Because that takes us back historically to thinking about, you know, the Black person as the problem all the time, right? So I wonder how the image in the photograph, is there a way that the image of the photograph solves that or deals with that issue, right? Or is it through the gaze of the photographer?
Man, Byron, I wish there was an answer for that. I try to address that through my body of work in the Company of Black. That's why I made those pictures. Because I just want to show, like, what do Black people look like when they're not considered to be somebody's problem, right? Or something we have to super celebrate and exalt because they are extremely, extraordinarily better than everyone else. That's the other dynamic, right? That's the other opposite end of the pole. So I tried to address that, and I think I did. I think I did a good job with that. I think I continue to do that. But I'm not the only person making pictures, and I'm not the only one, I'm not the only one making them. And so what's happening is I'm constantly on the lookout for pictures that do that, right? But I also understand, because you could argue, just because I think it's a problem, it doesn't mean that it's actually so. Because there are many Black artists who are being celebrated for photographs that I think are problematic in that they do that thing, right? I have a theory that white power structures want that kind of work from Black artists because it seems real. It seems like I'm down in the dirt digging and wrestling with the problems of race, right? Whereas I don't need to really see a school teacher. Well, that's not, who wants to see that, right? That's not going to get anyone stirred up. That's not going to raise anyone's hackles. It's not going to do it, right? And so my photographs, I like to say, require a more calm, measured approach and a critical gaze, right? Because again, I don't want to get into like, well, you shouldn't make that picture, right? Because I don't think that's the answer, right? I just want to make more critically engaged students so when they go out in the world, because what I am noticing, and I love this, is that I have students in my classes going, well, should he be there making pictures? And these are white students asking these questions, all right? So it gives me pause and some hope that there's a generation of artists who are coming up and understanding, well, maybe I shouldn't be there making these pictures. Or and if I am, I need to have a really good reason why, right? And that whole idea, and what I am seeing is that more people are teaching communities how to make pictures and tell their own stories. That's the crux of it. You have got to get cameras, recorders, video cameras into communities and let them tell their stories. And I think we're starting to see more of that happening. I know I've been on the forefront of that since the early 2000s. So I will be asked to go into poor neighborhoods, which I have no business being in, right? And so the first thing I would say was, why would I go there? Okay, I'll go there to teach them how to make a picture. And I'm gonna bring a poet with me who's also really good at what he does. And I'm gonna bring a dancer, and she's like fabulous at this. And we're gonna go in and we're gonna teach you all how to tell your story. And I'm not gonna tell you that you got to tell the story of violence happening to you. You can tell whatever story you want to tell, because that's the other problem too. That you go into places that appear to have no resources, nothing to offer, right? I say appear, and you think they'll have anything to say, right? That's not my job. My job is to give you the tools. And yes, I can direct you, I can help you, I can critique, but my job is to get you to tell your story. And sometimes I would just tell them, I don't need to know. Here's an example. We need to do 8th graders, west side of Chicago. Here go 10 cameras. Let's go on the playground, just make pictures. They all in a huddle. And I go over there, I go, what's going on? Mr. Johnson, Mr. McDonald, Javon is playing dead. And we want to make a crime scene photo. Now I could have said, okay. I said, well, no, we're not going to do that picture. Could we have Javon do something else? There are other pictures we could make, right? And so I think that's when I'm working, that's when I think the job that I want to do, how I want to see pictures function in the society is starting to happen. Will those kids become photographers? I don't know. But they definitely would not hold a camera and think about what they're pointing at the same way anymore. They have to understand that I'm critically engaged in what's in front of me, right? So I don't know, I mean, short answer to your question, I don't think that, like, I really am concerned that whenever you see a person of color in a picture, it's automatically politicized. And until you can get away from that, then the problem's not solved. We have to keep working on how we think about people in pictures, right? And if you are the person doing the depicting, the constructing, the making, you're even more, the onus is on you even more. The weight is on you even more because it starts with you. Jason, you had your hand up.
Hi, Cecil. How are you? I'm wondering if you knew if Ansel Adams felt any misgiving about working as a, essentially the PR office.
Right.
I mean, kind of a government patsy. I mean, these are wonderful images of people having like a great time.
Yeah.
And it's just not, I mean, it was happening in front of the camera,
right.
But I'm wondering if Ansel Adams was like, oh my gosh, this is just one side of the story. This is the government side of the story, that we're not mistreating American citizens.
From the quote here, the purpose of my work was to show how these people suffering under great justice. So he understands that part of it, right? And loss of property, business, and professions had overcome the sense of defeat and despair by building for themselves a vital community. See, you can't have it both ways. Like, how do you know they overcame that? Right? Because they present themselves to you and your camera and you and your power tool, and you are the symbol of power. Like, we know that the government sent you here to make pictures. You don't have to tell us that. We know that. So of course we're going to present ourselves a certain way. We don't want any more trouble than we already have, right? So you can easily, the oppressor or the oppressor's tool or the oppressor's assistant can easily fool themselves into thinking that they're somehow giving you a different point of view when they're not. So to answer the question, I don't think that he did. But he says it is an important historical document, and he's right. And I trust it can be put to good use.
The weirdest assignment ever.
Right. And it is like, well, Ansel didn't even need to take this assignment, but he did, right? Under the guise of, I'm so mad that they took my employee away. Where did he go? I want to go find out. He's already Ansel Adams by this time, which is why he was hired in the first place. Because the government understands that we can have someone who is approved by the larger society, right? He's a famous, well-known, creative, great photographer, where clearly he wouldn't photograph anything that was problematic. Yeah, it's you would really. I spend so much time with those images. I got big prints of them too. They really are. They're so beautiful and seductive, but they're like, they're so problematic. Yeah.
Now we have a couple more questions, and then we can wrap up. Caleb, I see your hand up. I'm going to read a question from Aaron in the chat first, and then Caleb, if you want to ask your question after. Aaron asks, I think I heard you mention that you wanted to make honest photographs. How do you know when the photo seems honest or true?
Oh man.
I also wanted to add a little bit to that, in that I noticed in the way that you were describing your work and your recent project that it just sounded like there was quite a lot of listening coming from you, from your experience with these mothers. And I can't speak for Ansel Adams's work and the listening that he did or did not do, but I was just wanted to also bring that up.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Like, when do you know? Like, when do you know? Sometimes I know after the fact, Aaron. Like, sometimes I don't know in the moment, because I have, and you experience it too. Over time, you learn to trust your instincts, your training, all the stuff that you read. You kind of bring all that to bear, and you let yourself be open for what could happen. But I hadn't thought that I was doing so much listening, but now that you say it to me, which is why these kinds of conversations are important, because I hadn't talked about it openly like this. So I was doing a lot of listening, and I would ask a lot of questions. And they were questions that were natural through my curiosity, wanting to be an asset to them, wanting to tell their story in a way that I felt proud about. And not that that's the litmus test, but that's what I kind of felt. I wanted to share my pride and my empathy for what was happening to you in the most open and honest way possible. So maybe listening was the key. And then sometimes, I can see it in the picture afterwards. Because photographs work like that. Sometimes they need to be made and looked at before you can discover what actually happened. That didn't happen when you're there in the room making the picture, right? I really like that question, to think about, like, how do I know? Because I'm always asking my students that, like, is this an honest picture, right? Especially since photography is so slippery. And photography can lie, and photography is misleading, and it does all these insidious things. I hope I got somewhere near an answer, but that's something for me to think about. Thank you for posing it.
Caleb, if you want to go ahead.
So, hi, thank you for coming to the class earlier. You were talking about imagery that elicits like strong emotion, versus your style that's more like calm, level-headed, critical. So is it like, and you talked to the women in the sisterhood more personally, came into their house. Is it more difficult to take candid photos that elicit the regular day-to-day emotions, or is it just largely underrepresented and underappreciated?
Yes. Yes to both of those. It's not an either or proposition. It's much more difficult to make a picture because they look candid, but they are not, right? There's a lot of artifice in the picture. Artifice as in art is in artifice, right? It's the art in artifice. And those pictures are sorely underrepresented. I know you hate when people do that. They say yes to both of them, but it's not an either or. Because I could spend 3 or 4 hours there trying to get those 1 or 2 photographs, but they're meant to look like you just walked in on them. If that makes sense.
It's good, thank you.
Okay, I know we have, Cecil, I can send you a transcript of the chat because there's a few comments that people left throughout, just
Okay.
responding to what you were speaking
No
about.
problem.
So
Mhm.
I will definitely make sure to send you a transcript of that. But I wanted to thank you so much for speaking tonight. I know we're already running around 7:30 now, so I want to make sure we let everyone head to bed soon. I know I would be. Unfortunately, I'm having some tech issues sharing the resource list that I promised and hyped up earlier, so I apologize for that. I can send it out to everyone though that attend tonight via email afterwards. So apologize for that. I somehow managed to run into tech issues every single time I do one of these. But you know, that's
That's
life in the modern age.
I want to say
Um,
before you finish, I really enjoy your space. Your campus is like one of my favorite places. When I showed there, was one of the really had such a good time, a good reception from the community there. Really wish I could have came there and been in person. Maybe went out to drink some people and talk more about what these things, you know, because that's how conversations really happen, right? We start them at a podium and then we kind of go off into these other spaces and we do the work of, you know, more discussion. So I look forward to being on campus in person at some point in the future. All the
Absolutely.
students out there, I hope you all are moving forward in your work and you are doing things that you feel proud about, you critically engaged with. And again, just thank you for the invitation. All the instructors on the line, I love hearing from you guys with questions, anything that you would like to talk about. Same thing for students as well. And this is what it means to be critically engaged with an audience. So it's not just a one-time, let's have a lecture, it's an ongoing conversation. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you again. Hopefully, this is an ongoing series. So I just want to quickly let everyone know who's on the chat still that the next speaker in the speaker series is coming up February 24th. It's the multimedia artist Chinu Luger. That is open for registration at this point. So, and if you have any issues finding that, the event is listed in Redbird Life. It's open to public, but please feel free to email me if you have any questions about that or issues registering. And we also will be having a few more events this semester, including a panel of ISU professors, many of you whom are on this Zoom call tonight. And so I'll be excited to announce those details soon. So hopefully, Cecil, if you're, you know, if things settle down a little bit more, we'd love to have you on campus and hopefully at some of the events. So thank you all again so much. And I hope you all have a lovely evening.
All right, take care, guys.